this girl had to deal with. Now, Missy has turned her life around, and my character, I wanted to take my character out of that extreme abject state and put her in a little bit more of a positive trajectory at the beginning of the book. So that, well, it wouldn't be quite the downer that my books have a tendency to be. And she ended up being the emotional core of the book. Once you start a book, you're never exactly sure where it's going to go. And she ended up being the real engine of the story. And I call her Jacqueline Garza, or Jackie. And so that was the second story that was of interest to me. The third story involved an incident where a city employee on a backhoe is doing something on the streets in Vallejo, and some kids start throwing rocks at him. Now, teenage kids, they're just goofing off. And then he gets off and he confronts him, and he just says, look, and words were exchanged, as they say. Nobody knows exactly what words. You can probably imagine some of them. And the kids jumped him. And then the next thing you know, there were 10 kids, and then there were 20 kids, and then there were 40 kids. And it was captured on a surveillance camera from a nearby gas station. And so Vallejo, which was already going through bankruptcy, suddenly has this reputation of having the worst kids in the world. And I had a feeling like, I think there's a better story. I think there's a deeper story than just our kids are out of control. So I put those three incidents together and tried to fashion my story out of what would happen if the head of the firefighters union, who was the spearhead to the bankruptcy, and who at one time was the lion of the union movement. People looked at him as being the real firebrand of the guy who's looking after the workers. But he played chicken with the city, and he had always won. And he took him into federal bankruptcy court. And the judge said, look, you guys need to work this out, because sooner or later I'm going to make a ruling, and one of you is going to be really unhappy. And they didn't work it out, and the judge ruled that you can break union contracts in bankruptcy. And suddenly this guy went from being the lion of the union movement to everybody's scapegoat. And he found a job out of town, and he kind of disappeared. So I decided I'm going to take him, this guy who's got this new escape valve. And Jackie has, for whatever reason, she's on her upturn, but when she's in the rehab center, things get more personal than she wants them to be. She's got things she doesn't want to talk about and refuses to talk about. And the other girls refuse to let that go. And she decides, I'm out of here. Now give me $2,000, I'm going to get to Mexico, I'm going to go where nobody knows who I am, and I can start my life over. And so she hooks up with this guy who says, you know what, I'm leaving town. Why don't you come with me? And, clearly his motives could be nobler. But she sits there and just thinks, is this my best ticket out or is it not? She's trying to figure out what to do when they're in a fire car one morning and some kids see him and they know what this means. They know who she is, they know who he is, and they start pitching rocks at the car. And you can imagine where it goes from there. So that was kind of where I wanted the story to go. However, to start the book, I really wanted to start with Jackie. And so I'm going to read a little bit about that, and then maybe talk a little bit more about whatever, or just answer questions, or see if everyone's still awake, and then go from there. Thanks. There's seats, I think, if you'd like to. Or no, you'd rather not? I understand that. I always stand by the door too. It's my favorite spot. Okay. In the pre-dawn darkness, the forest smelled peaty with mushrooming rot. She hacked a path through sword ferns and redwood sorrel and coiling blackberries spiked with thorns. A long-haired girl, 8 years old, lightheaded from little to eat for 3 days and stripped naked, shackled to a broken chain. She feared crashing through the woods in hopeless circles, or worse, just plunging deeper into the tangled undergrowth, lost for good. From time to time, glancing up through a feathery opening in the pine and eucalyptus branches, she stared at the drifting canopy of mist and felt abandoned by the moon. Then gravel, like bits of broken glass, stabbed the soles of her feet. She tripped on a jagged lip of asphalt. She'd reached the road, curving, 2-lane, dark. Hugging herself for warmth, how long before she heard a car? Minutes maybe, warped into hours. The thing rumbled up the fog-bound hill, headlights a smeary glow, then breaking the turn, and she stepped out onto the blacktop, breath visible, hands splayed. The car braked and lurched to a stop, engine throbbing under the hood, tailpipe with its dervish of white exhaust. She realized it might be him coming back. The man they'd identify as Victor Cope, but to her was simply a creep, Mr. Menthol Meth Head. What if she got free and stumbled all this way, only to make it easy for him? He'd chase her into the woods, take her down, grab her by the hair, and drag her back to that moldy house. And then, he hated her enough already. She wasn't like Marina, his little blossom, his perfection. The driver's side door creaked open. The ceiling light gave birth to a silhouette beyond the headlight glare. A man. He dragged himself from behind the wheel, got out. Jesus H. Christ. He edged closer. Some kind of redneck long hair, lumberjack shirt, thick black beard, scuffed boots, voice like a chain-smoking folk singer. Are you? Jesus fucking hell, you okay? He took off the shirt, wrapped her in the thick, coarse wool, warm from his body, put his arm around her, then just as quick snapped the arm away like he'd been bit, cautious, caring. He led her to the passenger side door. Go ahead, get in. I'm not going to hurt you. 10 years later, she'd wonder how she knew to trust that. An old El Camino, kind of car Richie, her brother, would cream over. Inside it reeked of cigarettes and black coffee, while Mardi Gras beads dangled from the rear view and the radio glowed, the music faint, Nighthawk soul or some kind of R&B. He got in, slammed his door, reached for the gear shift, stopped. Turning toward her, he stared for a second, like she was a faun, an elf, a changeling sitting in his car. You're that girl, he said quietly. The one got took up north. No, she thought. I'm the other one. What am I thinking? He slapped his head. Get the hell away from here. Throwing the El Camino into drive, he roared off down the curving mountain road. Velocity seemed to suit him. Glancing once his way, she saw his jaw was set, but his eyes were calm, steady, and she took comfort in that. He switched off the radio. Must have had you holed away in one of those houses back up the ridge. He shook his head. There's coons and mountain lions and coyotes up in there. Lucky one of them didn't spot you, slink on down in the dark, drag you off. I'm not afraid of raccoons. Her first words in, how long? He chuckled. Boy, you're a tough one, aren't you? He stopped at a T in the road, looked both ways. A sign read Bonnie Doon, 1.5 miles, with an arrow pointing right. He turned left. Weren't really the raccoons I was talking about. I know. That seemed to tickle him even more. A muted kind of laughter in his eyes. She liked that, liked him. She needed to. I'm taking you down into town, get you to a hospital. That's all right? The word yes. It caught in her throat, scared her. She nodded. Well, he added, maybe not directly to the hospital. Pulling the heavy shirt tighter, she eyed the chrome door handle, then glanced out through the windshield, looking for the next spot he might slow down. Don't worry, I'll make sure you get looked after and all. I just mean I can't get tangled up with the law. No cops, no questions. He nodded as though to confirm the end of an argument he'd been having with himself. It's complicated. Let's just leave it at that. It wasn't until then she realized he had not mentioned his name. I'm Jacqueline Garza, she said. Nice to meet you. A nod, like a gentleman tipping his hat. Seriously, let's leave it there. He drove down the winding hillside road until they reached a main drag leading south into Santa Cruz. At a little diner called Bernadette's, he pulled into the parking lot, killed the ignition, glanced at his watch. The diner glowed like a spaceship serving breakfast. He turned toward her, arm pursed on the steering wheel, eyes warm but wary. Here's how it is, he said. Got me a friend who works here, great lady, name is Dawn. I'm going to go in, let her know I found you up in the hills, then hand you over to her so she can get you seen to. Going to be a lot of hoopla surrounding that, and it's just not what I'm into, right? I'm glad I could help, real glad. Happy you're safe. And you are. You're safe now. His hand reached out. She stiffened, not ready to be touched. But he didn't touch her. He dug a cigarette pack from the shirt pocket, tapped out a smoke, lit it, thumbed in the dash lighter. I need you to forget me now, okay? Forget this car, forget my face. A stranger picked you up, saw you standing there by the road about 2 miles east of the Bonnie Doon Cutoff on Woodbriar Ridge. Remember that. They're going to need to know the spot so they can backtrack, find the house you escaped from. The lighter popped. He plucked it from its socket, touched the red coil to the tip of his cigarette, that intimate hiss as it singed the tobacco. This stranger, one who found you, some kind of holy roller, let's say, do-gooder type, no reward necessary. He dropped you off around here. You stumbled into the diner on your own. He exhaled a long plume of smoke. It smelled like him. Sorry to make it complicated, but it's for the best. He smiled with a wary sort of kindness. Think you can do that for me? Of course she could. And she did. She gave him back his shirt and let the woman named Dawn bundle her up in a big soft sweater as the El Camino drove off. As she sat at a table inside the diner with some buttered toast and a cup of hot chocolate till the highway patrol arrived. She never mentioned the stranger in the El Camino who'd appeared out of nowhere, though from that day on she'd envied his ability to become invisible. She said a man in a suit and tie and glasses picked her up, prayed when he found her, prayed as they drove down the mountain, praising the Lord and his mysterious grace and refusing to accept recognition for his good deed. That would be unchristian, he'd said, the sin of pride, leaving her within an easy walk of safety. She lied, the first in a blizzard of lies, until it became the easier thing, the truth so unforgiving.
Yes.
That sort of sets up thematically the rest of the book, the whole idea of being rescued by somebody who you think may have an agenda or not. Once you start lying, how you can't stop lying, what it means to get out of that pit. I was asked by a blog recently, what are the thematic premises of your book? And you don't really think about that stuff until you're done, and then sometimes you realize that you actually did have something to say, but you needed to write the book to figure out what it was. And the two things I realized when I was done that I had been digging at were that there's no freedom without trust. We tend to think of freedom as an individual thing, and that's exactly wrong. That we're not free unless we can trust other people. And the other was that the truth doesn't exist in a book. It's not in the mind of God. It's not in a courtroom. It's not in a library book. The truth is something we either tell to each other or we don't. We either share the truth or we share a lie. It's a social thing, not an abstraction. And those are the things that it took me a while to unearth as I was writing the book. So that was that. I could keep jabbering, but I usually don't like doing that. So what I'd rather do is see if anybody has any questions and yes, my ideas come from outer space. We'll get that one out of the way first. Anywho. Yes, thank you, Sheldon.
So you wrote, the last thing you wrote was The Art of Character,
Yeah.
which is a really good book on how to do character.
Right.
Did that influence your approach when you started putting this book together?
You mean did I start paying attention to the crap I put in my own book? Oddly enough. Actually, there's a longer answer to that. I remember when I began to write the book, somebody said, "Oh, you're doing a writing book. What are you going to write about?" I said, "Well, I'm going to do it on character." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I think I do it well." Because you never write what you do well. You're going to screw it up. If you do it well, it's probably intuitive. Now it's like, you're going to be looking at the pedals every time you ride the bicycle. You're going to fall over. And I realized he was probably right, but luckily he wasn't. I began to realize that being a little bit more mindful about character just made me more careful. And I'm beginning a new novel now, and I'm teaching a class on character, and I'm finding myself using the exact same template and realizing that, this really does work well. And I've been gratified at the one consistent thing people have talked about with this book are the characters. So I think I'm doing something right. Although I began rereading bits of The Art of Character, and this is the writer's curse. Every writer in this room will know what I'm talking about. I was looking at the book going, God, I really wish I could rewrite this. I'd like to do a second edition of this book. I've learned so much more since I finished this thing. And especially with text, because they last forever. We can't rely on Sheldon for every question. It's against the rules, Catherine.
How did your experience as a PI influence this book?
Oh, okay. The question is, how did my experience as a PI influence this book? That's another interesting question, because I had avoided writing a PI book. I was a private investigator for 15 years. I worked on the DeLorean case, the People's Temple trial, the Cotton Club murder case, a slew of marijuana smuggling cases that were all related to a group of guys out of San Diego called the Coronado Company. But when I looked at PI novels, I said, those guys aren't anybody I recognize. That had nothing to do with my job. They were the plains gunmen in a city. And I just thought, I don't know that anybody wants to hear about a real PI. And in particular, as PIs, when you are investigating, a lot of times you're working criminal defense. And although the crime genre is not universally conservative, there are certainly elements of it that are. A great many readers don't want to hear it from the defense bar. And they just presume, the Otto Penzler again just says, I want them in jail yesterday. And this is sort of an attitude. I realize that maybe it's what I have to say on that level, won't convert into a book. So, but I did find that people were more than willing to follow a criminal. So I could always talk about my clients, I just couldn't talk about me. And I was fine with that for 4 books. But given The Sopranos and given Breaking Bad, and the whole anti-hero zeitgeist, I was beginning to think, we might be turning around now to where we do need a credible hero. And
Thank you.
And I thought, okay, and I knew enough. I now had enough books under my belt to feel confident that I thought I could pull it off if I did it well enough, and I felt that I could. And I talked to 2 other writers, one of whom was a former PI, Michael Corita, and the other being Charlie Houston, who just encouraged me, saying, look, you've got a wealth of experience, you shouldn't turn your back on it. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. The first draft of the book, though, was a complete failure, because the character was too much like me. I just assumed I knew the character. And he ended up, I have a chapter in Art of Character called Protagonist Problems, stiffs, ciphers, and sleepwalkers. And that pretty much defined my hero, He was just, he wasn't there in any tangible sense. And I learned a lesson that I now teach my students quite a bit, in that you have to create a character different from you, so that you have to discover them. You have to create them. There has to be a tension between what you know and what you don't know about that character. It relates to a great phrase that I believe is attributed to Eudora Welty. She was asked, well, do you believe in writing what you know? She goes, actually, I believe that you should write what you don't know about what you know. And I just went, yeah. So I made Phelan Tierney a PI almost by default. He's actually a lawyer. And the reason I did that is because I had worked with lawyers. And they always wanted to do our job, because we actually got to talk to people. And instead of just sitting in the library dealing with co-counsel or opposing counsel or the judge or someone else. And we actually went out and knocked on doors and talked to human beings, and in sometimes fascinating circumstances. But I also knew that there's a certain type of intelligence and aggression to the practice of law, having been married to a lawyer, having worked with lawyers, that I really respect. And I wanted that in my character. I wanted him to be, the problem with most PIs is they're much like cops, which is they're like warriors. And I wanted someone who was a little bit more of a thinker. I also didn't want a hunter, I wanted a healer. I knew that all the people I had respected in criminal defense were people who really cared about their clients and had a deep, profound sense of social justice, were almost all lefties with real sense that, the system is heavily skewed against those who really have never had much of a break, and that it's a noble cause working on their behalf. So I wanted someone with that kind of mindset and that kind of heart. I felt that if I made a character like that, he would be true to my experience. He wouldn't be me. I'd have to still, get something out of, I'd have to create a little bit about him, and that was fun. And I think it's worked out okay. It's funny, one person said, I hope this isn't a series, because Corbett's so good at character. I kind of went, because that's the problem with series, is that you got the same, you can't have a character going through, a 17-book series, and in every book he has some huge revelation about his life. Sooner or later you run out of, unless he's Harry Bosch, who has more baggage than any human being in the world. But I learned a lesson from Kate Atkinson, and that is that it doesn't have to be the PI who goes through that transformation. It can be the client. It can be someone else in the book. And with that knowledge, I thought, okay, I think I can do this. And so we'll see how that works out. But so the PI experience has come to the fore in a lot of ways, but mostly because you just see you get a view of the world you couldn't get any other way. People ask me, it's very often people say I'm a PI who became a writer. Actually, I was writing before I became a PI. And I took the job precisely to get material. Not that I told my clients that. But I knew that this, what I said, these would be my years at sea. This would give me the worldview and the experience that I would always rely upon in my writing, and that's very true. And the first thing I learned is that I did not recognize any of my clients in the portrayals of criminals I saw on TV. And I felt that there was a place for me to talk about that. And there's a novella that's coming out in July with Phelan Tierney, my hero, as the protagonist. And the sister of a man accused of killing a police officer comes to him for help and just says, he's not who they're saying that he is. Can you help me? And of course, Phelan Tierney, being who he is, says yes. And that's, I'm really proud of it. I think it's a good piece of work. It's about 90 pages, which is short for me, as anyone who knows my books can attest. But it's a pretty meaty little thing, but it'll be an ebook, and in July we'll hopefully get that around to people. Yeah? I'm looking at you. Bail me out here, Bob. Oh, John. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Someone said that art is what you leave out, and I noticed that in your books there's a lot of subtext. There's not a lot of overriding on. How do you decide what to leave out? I imagine from your books, there's another book next to it of all the stuff you've carved out and had to write for yourself.
Actually, the novella is a bunch of outtakes from other books. The question has to do with, how do I, there's a lot of subtext in my books. There's a lot of things I don't say. Again, relying on art of character, my line is, less is more unless it's not enough. And it's figuring out that line, and it's really hard. I mean, you're always wondering. The lesson that really came to me was that it's not about me telling the reader what they need to know. It's me saying enough so the reader becomes engaged, and the reader can imagine on their own. And it's this weird, tricky line where you're just trying to give enough so that they're imagining the story, and I'm not just shoveling it onto their heads. That's as good an explanation I can think of, but I learned writing in acting school rather than, I never took English classes in college. We didn't have much English. This is terrible to say because it's not true anymore. But I went to the Ohio State University, and the English department was okay, but it wasn't great. It now has a wonderful creative program. Donald Ray Pollock came out of it in particular. He's sort of a star. But I learned how to write when I came out to California and studied acting. And the three playwrights who taught me the most were Arthur Miller, who taught me how to turn an idea into a dramatic entity, not just people talking, but how to embody the idea into characters who made it live. Tennessee Williams, who taught me character, in particular women characters. And Pinter, who is subtext. Nobody in a Pinter play is saying what they're really thinking.
Yeah.
And I don't know, somehow that just really got into my bones. There's a wonderful story by Pinter where he talks about, he was Jewish, and after the war there was a real strong fascist backlash in Britain, and in particular anti-Semitic. And there was a club that he and his friends used to go to, and it was the end of the cul-de-sac. And all these British black shirts would hang out and just line this alley that you had to walk down to get to this club. And all that anybody would say is, things like, so how you doing? I'm doing okay. Oh, you okay? Okay is okay. Yeah. Okay is great. So you're okay? Yeah, I'm fine. And of course, the menace under that was palpable. And I just thought that's kind of what you're always after. And again, when I teach, I say that remember that dialogue is action. People are doing things to each other with every line of dialogue. They're not imparting information. They're trying to convince. They're trying to deceive. They're trying to warn. There's an action underneath it. I think that's what I'm always thinking about. Yes.
Yeah, what's your relationship with the police department in Vallejo?
The question is, what's my relationship with police department in Vallejo? I actually get along well with them now. Since the bankruptcy was over. I always got along well with one particular officer because his parents lived 2 doors down the street. And he helped me with my second novel. And his name is Sid DeJesus. He's now a lieutenant. And Sid's the kind of guy, that if you walked in right now, you'd go, cop. It wouldn't take you a nanosecond to figure it out. He just has that thing. And he's always been very helpful. And he worked on the Mitzi Sanchez case and knew the family well. He's still in touch with Mitzi and helped me quite a bit with this book. Jim O'Connell, and this is terrible, but I stole one of Jim's stories and it's in this book and I'm not going to tell you what it is. But he was a captain, he just retired. And he was thinking about writing a book, and we met, and so we talked and got along well.
Great,
And then I just stole his idea. Never tell a story to a writer. I'm sorry. We can't help ourselves. Okay, I'll tell you the story. And he was just saying he has a daughter, and if you know anything about cops and their daughters, oh man, it's like the minute they start dating, you don't want to be the guy who shows up in the house. You just don't. And this guy shows up in this really cherry Mustang. You know, and it's just gorgeous. And while his daughter's still upstairs getting ready, Jim's out front going, wow, look at this, man. This is a gearhead's wet dream. Oh, I love this. Mind if I sit in it? And he says, they always put the dope under the passenger seat. He says, we sit down and go, oh, this is great. I'll just move the chair back. Oh, Todd, what's this? That was the end of that guy. And so I just thought, I can't not use that. I'm sorry. I mean, you said it first, but I wrote it first. So anyway, so Jim was great. And then there was another guy named Jason Potts, who we worked with a lot. When we were having our problems with the houses in Vallejo, I was part of a group that, we went from 10 to 350 neighborhood watch groups in the span of like 6 months.
Wow.
And the problem was the liaison with the police department, when they cut things down, it used to be called Beat Health, for some reason, which was just meant, it was a neighborhood outreach, and they cut that back, so we didn't have anybody to talk to. And Jim O'Connell and Jason Potts were the two cops who we could always say, listen, we got a problem with this guy. And Jason was stellar, and he was pretty much my anti-gang guy. He's also the computer crimes guy. You know, he's the guy who impersonates Tiffany. You know, and gets on the web and goes, hi.
Oh,
you know,
sure, I'll come meet you.
Yeah, exactly. You know, my parents just don't understand me. I'm really lonely and everything. You know, I'm 14, by the way, but I'm a mature 14. Jason loves following up on those things, and Jason also, you know, getting an advanced degree, and I helped him, you know, do his thesis and stuff. They're really good guys. So my relationship right now with the Vallejo PD is pretty good. But we've had a real change in the regime. The chief who was there at the bankruptcy is gone. And it was an interesting phenomenon. I mean, when the bankruptcy hit, this chief just said, okay, you're screwing my guys, the heck with you. And he wouldn't send cops out. I mean, just saying, it's property crime, we don't have the manpower. You have to deal with that on your own. And that's where we just began developing the neighborhood watch groups, because we realized we were on our own. Well, a lot of the cops just said, this is nuts. This isn't why I became a cop, you know, to have a snit fit with the people I'm supposed to protect. And people like Sid and Jim, you know, began to really work with us on saying, hey, what do you need? What can we do? And once that chief retired, we got a new chief, things changed almost overnight. And the chief just said, no, you know, we're here to serve this public, you know, let's put the bad blood behind us, let's get, you know, to solve problems. And it's really, really improved. We have, things are working much better than they used to. So that's relief. It's really not the shithole it's made out to be. Let me tell you. I actually said that and I didn't say shithole, I said hellhole. But, you know, because the problem is, I got quoted in the LA Times, a reporter came up to interview people. And I drove around all day. I was really nice. And I should have known this. I've been a PI. You never talk to lawyers, you never talk to PIs, and you never talk to reporters. You just don't. Because they'll never quote you right. Well, she quoted me right, but she only quoted the one nasty thing I said all day. Which was, I said, well, you know, the unofficial of Vallejo used to be, come for the crack, stay for the hookers. You know, this is the bankruptcy, it's Vallejo, where your hopes come to die. That made it into the paper. So, I had some bridge building to do. Hopefully I've done that. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I don't know if the epitaph has changed, but if it's the same, I was wondering about the story behind selecting it. It's so beautiful, exquisite for this book.
The
beginning, Kate Atkinson, the quote.
Oh, they kept the quote in. Did they actually keep the quote in?
I don't know. I have the art.
Oh, you have the art. Oh, yeah. No, they took all the quotes out. It was amazing. I had this fight with legal. They have this publisher has absolutely the most gun-shy attitude toward quotes I have ever had in my life. They decided that we would need permission for every single quote, so I took it out. So, but the quote you're having is, I think, it's from...
About missing, yeah.
Yeah, it's about
there
missing.
There were a lot of ways of getting lost, not all of them involved being missing.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I'm right, that's from When Will There Be Good News?
They made you take the epigrams out?
Yeah, everything.
Why?
I know. Well, they just didn't think it was fair use. They were worried.
Okay.
They said, well,
Not
They
fair
have to
use.
get permissions and they don't want to do that because they have to pay people like me.
yeah. And then, so I wanted permissions. My editor said, well, I can get you permissions. I've been down the permissions road before.
Sure.
Yeah,
I said, I don't need it.
yeah.
Okay.
I'll just take out the quotes.
It
I mean,
fits it so
actually,
beautifully.
I had the whole line, Mercy of the Night, from a song by Elbow. He said, did you trust your noble dreams and gentle expectations to the mercy of the night? I love that line. You know, and that was a crucial part in the book. Okay, it's okay. Go listen to the song. It's lovely, but you know, it's something you learn to just, you know, choose your battles. And that was one I thought I can give up on. And truth of the matter is, every now and then, when you're sticking quotes in books, it's like you're trying to make the book loftier than it needs to be. Just let the book speak for itself. It's actually not a bad lesson for me to learn. But I didn't have a Clifford Odets quote in it. I was pretty impressed with that. Who talks about Clifford Odets anymore? You know? God love him. Anybody seen Sweet Smell Success lately? Great Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis movie. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. Clifford Odets worked on the script. It's fabulous. I saw a hand sort of flirting with Ascension back here. Yes?
Right here, regarding the permissions issue, do you have any thoughts or comments about the publishing process and the commercial environment of today for book writing and publishing?
That's a good question.
I have lots of
Yes.
thoughts. Very, very,
Lizzie, would you like to confer
very
with your lawyer
quiet
before you get
thoughts.
going?
You pick your battles, is what you said.
Yeah, you pick your battles. It's very competitive, and sometimes that's really good. I mean, you really have to raise your game to be published right now. A good book is not good enough. You really have to, I really do believe that you really have to try to rate your best book. Or it's just somebody else that's going to be there. Everybody, you know, the word processor created 1 billion writers. Some of them are quite good. And I always try to aim for those. I think what you're saying more is not so much a publishing issue as a technology issue. I think with the internet and in particular Amazon sales, you're seeing a complete sea change in how people get products. I don't think it's total. I know that I still need bookstores. I know that a lot of us do, but I think the bookstores that are surviving are ones like this, that are not just places you go to buy books, but we're sort of a center of community. I think Tattered Cover in Denver is like that. Bookshop in Isha, a little bookshop over there, is very much a community-based bookstore. And I think those are the ones that are surviving. And I hope they continue to. But all brick and mortar stores, no matter what they sell, are really suffering. For a number of reasons, not just Amazon, but That's the answer my lawyer would say.
That was a little
She's
much.
right there.
Yeah.
It's getting close to that time, and nobody's eating the macarons now. I'm going to be very personally hurt if those things are gone by the time you guys leave. So why don't we, if there's one more question, I'll take that. If not, why don't we go ahead and sign books? And thank you so much for coming out.
Okay.
I know it's Night of a Lakers game, and I'm not Lakers, I mean Warriors game. God, I can't believe I made that
I'm telling Joe Clifford, you said.
Okay, I'll take the last question because I'm from the UK, so I'm very interested to be here, and it's very exciting. I'd like to get back to the text because I'm not familiar with your work, although I have just bought it. So, Fallon, is he a continuing? You talked about series a minute ago. Has he appeared always or often, or?
No, this is the first book in
Because,
what I hope will be something of a series.
In our crime fiction genre, as I'm sure you know, we have many very, very celebrated and successful writers, a lot of whom seem to be in love with their character, and the actual plots and stories and the drivers of the novel become very secondary to their detective, their lawyer, I mean, if you're talking right from Dorothy Sayers, who was in love with Peter Wimsey, all the way down through our two dames we've just lost, Judy James and Ruth Rendell, both of whom were very much in love with their created characters. Now, is that a trap that people fall into? Is it a difficulty to be avoided?
I don't think it's a trap. If you love your
Repeat the
character.
question, Dave.
The question is, as she's from the UK, she's a number of really wonderful British writers. And apparently, every now and then in a series, a writer can become so sort of enamored of their
on the character.
hero.
And also, you just said if you take a character through a series, there's actually only a number of different facets of his or her personality. You can bolt onto them until they end up, prime material for a shrink because they're so screwed up with all these attributes that you.
Well, yeah, every now and then you just give them a bunch of psychological tics to work through, which isn't, of course, what the genre is about.
I mean, Ruth Rendell had sent him off for rehab because she kind of couldn't do any more with him, and then he came back as rather a changed character. But your guy is.
Well, my guy's, so far I haven't had that problem, obviously. The premise that I'm using for him, and I hope will save me from some of that, is that if you, again, I know a lot of cops, and they have a tendency to believe people don't change. Reform is a myth. You're born the way you are. That's just it. Nobody's going to change. I happen to know that's not true. I have a friend of mine who was a bank robber, spent 8 years in federal prison, wrote a wonderful memoir called The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell. His name is Joe Loya. And Joe counsels people transitioning out of prison into life about the problems. And he just says, look, I'm always going to be a criminal. I'm always, every time I walk into a room, I kind of go, okay, what am I going to have to use for a weapon? If a fight breaks out. That's a very prison thing. Well, he kind of gets over that. He's got a lovely daughter, a lovely wife, everything's fine in his life, but he's still kind of, he's just kind of got that edgy thing. He knows he's not going to change, but what can you change? And I find that fascinating. And so I find Phelan has screwed up major in his life, and it's in the book. And he's had to reinvent himself. And he realizes it can be done. And he wants to devote himself to people who are willing to take that shot. He's not always right in his judgment, and that will be his flaw. He sometimes is more trusting than he needs to be. But very often what it'll be the client's journey. Someone once described the crime genres. You got to remember that the detective is Virgil, the client is Dante. And that's not a bad way to look at it. And I think Chandler talked about the fact that that Marlowe always thought of himself as somewhat soiled, but he was trying to help, and he had to deal with the mean streets so that the client didn't have to. And I think if you do that and you realize it's not just about your main hero, but it's about the other characters in the book, I think you can save yourself from that what you're talking about. Dennis Lehane once said, have you ever heard anybody say, you know, the 17th book in the series was really my favorite? However, I picked up the 49th book in Ed McBain's 87th Precinct series, and it was great. And I hated him. How did he do that? And just some people have that gift. And he, of course, he was the one who invented the precinct as a character. So he had multiple characters to draw on. But he was just, some people have it, some people don't. I think some people should write standalones. Some people should avoid series. But it's a real challenge because sooner or later, you're just kind of telling the same story again.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, and the problem is if you've got a career and you've got to understand we want the next book and you've got the readers out there, you're going to be writing that book. And sometimes that can become a trap. So, anywho, okay, seriously, macarons, eat them.